Hey everyone, it's Kong, and I thought I'd try something a little different this week. Since both of these banners are straight up reruns of banners we've already seen this very year, I thought I'd repackage my earlier videos and then interject director's commentary style wherever there are differences or new information worth mentioning, and there is some. So let's get right into these Destiny banners featuring Shilinka, Tsubame, and Angelina, and Bozel, Liana, and Luna. Both banners will run from October 14th to the 27th. The Destiny Guarantee mechanic means the first SSR you pull from each banner is guaranteed to be a focus unit that you don't already have. After your first SSR pull, or if you already have all 3 characters on a banner, then you have the usual 20% chance to get an off-banner unit. Now let's get availability out of the way in advance. Shilinka, Tsubame, and Angelina don't show up on the predicted banner schedule, meaning that none of them will be headlining a banner before mid-April at the earliest. And as I predicted in last week's video, the Helena, Florentia, and Betty banner did indeed reappear on the schedule in April. So I'd say this one should make its return around April or May 2022 as well. The Bozel, Liana, and Luna banner is on the schedule, and it'll be coming back in March. Alright, so let's get started with Shilinka. Shilinka is an assassin who specializes in making your opponents spend all their time reading her skills. Her talent gives her a damage boost and damage reduction if she ends her turn with no allies within 2 spaces. She can revive once, with 90% of her hit points, at the expense of being stunned for a bit afterwards. Her 3-cost skill is a single target attack. If your target has no allies within 2 spaces, and you kill them, then you get to act again. If your target does have adjacent allies, you ignore 20 to 40% of their defense. So you get one or the other effect depending on your enemy's positioning. Her unique helmet boosts her damage dealt when entering combat, increases her self-buff duration, and prevents her buffs from ticking down when she's in her post-revive stun state. She's a member of Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida and Epsilon, and Mythical Realm, buffed by Gizaroth and the Sage of the Trees. For bonds, she unlocks the defensive bond for Kruger, timely, and the attack bond for the upcoming King of Crimsonia, so not our current Rainforce, but the upcoming new version. That's King of the Red Moon, he's out now. For her own bonds, she needs Brenda to unlock her defensive bond and Rainforce to unlock her attack bond. For content, in PvE, she's on faction for Scylla in the Eternal Temple, and Fenrir and Jormungandr in Ancient Beckoning. To be honest though, she doesn't have much in her toolkit that makes her very impressive for protracted fights against big bosses, so she's really more designed with PvP in mind. She brings a few of the usual sneaky assassin tricks to the table. She has a skill that ignores guard as long as she has no allies within 3 spaces. She gets another movement opportunity after killing an enemy with this, so you could run away from your team, pick someone off, and then fall back to safety, but you better be sure you can get the kill with it. She also has a 1-cost skill called Flash that teleports her, grants her +2 movement, and gives her a buff that lets her attack an enemy directly, bypassing soldiers if there's another enemy adjacent to the target. Obviously, you can use this in conjunction with your 3C, since it ignores a chunk of the enemy's defense if there are adjacent enemies. Okay, so assassins are in a bit of an awkward place right now. They're traditionally a good counter to debuff teams, but there are also anti-assassin techs out there like Kruger's Shield and Hilda's Hilda. If you really want a detailed Shilinka breakdown, then I suggest checking out my earlier episode featuring Professor Hout, just because he goes into a lot more detail, like 40 minutes worth of detail, on all the ins and outs of how to actually build and use Shilinka. So I'll link that up here and down there. Alright, so let's move on to Tsubame. Tsubame is another assassin. Part of her talent is typical ninja stuff, a boost to attack and skill based on how many enemies are around. The other part is based on enemies not being around. If she ends her turn without taking or dealing any damage, and there are no enemies within 2 rings, then she hides, making enemies unable to target her with attacks or skills. At least until someone gets within 1 space of her, or she deals some damage. Her exclusive helm enhances this hidden status even further, giving her additional crit rate and mobility. It also just straight up gives her a boost to damage dealt, and protects her from some AoE damage whether she's hidden or not. Her 3-cost skill is a fairly standard guard-ignoring, crit-boosting assassin attack, with the added bonus that she's allowed to move away 2 spaces after getting a kill, and she's allowed to hide even though she just did damage. Anyway, remember that just because she can't be targeted doesn't mean she can't still be caught in the span of an AoE attack. She's a member of Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida and Epsilon, and Langrisser Reincarnation, buffed by Ares and Hilda. For bonds, she unlocks the defensive bond for Florentia. She also unlocks the important defensive bond for the brand new Princess Alliance faction buffing tank, Christiane. And for her own bonds, she needs Maya for her defensive bond and Florentia for her attack bond. For content, in PvE, she's only on faction for Scylla and Jormungandr, and she's not really built for bossing, but she can be set up to cheese some other content with Quickstep, which boosts her skill by 30% and lets her take an additional action, and Quick Flash, which lets her attack before her opponent if she has more skill. On the PvP side, she's not exactly a commonly encountered assassin. I think dedicated Tsubame diehards, and you know who you are, could set her up to be quite threatening, but she's not common for a reason. Really, her main PvP use is to unlock bonds for Florentia and Christiane, which, to be fair, is a pretty important use. So, rounding out the lineup with Angelina. Angelina is a well-rounded DPS, usually flying, who relies on a lot of act again and move again gimmickry to make her a dynamic threat. Her 3-cost skill, for example, is a particularly disruptive AoE attack that pushes enemies back, has a chance to freeze them, and lets her act again if she connects with 3 or more targets. And her unique gear prevents her buffs from ticking down when she uses one of her act again skills. So her whole kit kind of revolves around this dynamic process. She's a member of Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida and Epsilon, Princess Alliance, buffed by Shelfaniel and Luna and Christiane, and Yles Legends, buffed by Landius and Sigma. For bonds, she unlocks the defensive bond for Rachel and the attack bonds for Shelfaniel and Melania. For her own bonds, she needs Matthew for her defensive bond, so everyone's got that one covered, and Shelfaniel for her attack bond. For content, in PvE, she's on faction for Phoenix, Leviar, and Scylla, and has good mobility and ally rescuing capabilities with Alternate, which can make her a solid option against Scylla. In fact, Alternate and her flyer mobility can make her a helpful overall pick for solving problems in general PvE content like Timeless Trials and challenges and all that stuff. She's also on faction and actually a pretty solid pick against both Jormungandr and Nidhogg in Ancient Beckoning. On the PvP side, her 3-cost skill can make Angelina a dangerous nuisance in Apex Arena. Hilda does shut down her displacement, but I've still seen way too many fully frozen teams to underestimate her. Okay, so here's the quick and dirty. We have Shilinka, who's an assassin with teleport, guard ignore, soldier bypass, act again, and self-revive in some form or another. She unlocks the defensive bond for Kruger and the attack bond for the King of Crimsonia. We have Tsubame, who's an assassin who can avoid being targeted. She can ignore guard and has great mobility with her unique helm. She unlocks the defensive bond for Florentia and Christiane. And finally we have Angelina, who's a solid all-round DPS with a disruptive 3C skill. She unlocks the defensive bond for Rachel and the attack bonds for Shelfaniel and Melania. Bozel is an AoE blanket debuff specialist with a piece of unique armor that inflicts an additional random debuff on enemies that you damage. His 3-cost skill, slated to arrive on global servers in September, is, you guessed it, a big debuffing AoE that gets stronger the more times you cast it. He has one of the 2 faction buffs for Dark Reincarnation, giving you a 15% damage boost against enemies who have more than 3 debuffs. The other faction buff comes from Licorice. He's also a member of Mythical Realm, buffed by Gizroff and the Sage of the Trees. These factions put him on faction for Fenrir in Ancient Beckoning, and he's an essential piece of the puzzle in that fight, contributing lots of debuffs and also cycling huge damage with his AoE spells. He has arguably lost his top spot there to Kruger, but he'll likely be back when his 3C comes out. He's also very useful for Leviar in Eternal Temple with his magical attacks and his access to a summon to help soak up the boss's gimmick debuff. As always, he's great against the Ice Dragon and various random challenges that you can tackle with an AoE bomb strategy. He's still a common fixture in Apex Arena as well, with AoE debuff teams looking more common than ever in Season 7 and 8. He unlocks the attack bond for Ares, Bernhardt, Licorice, and Egbert. Add the terrifying upcoming new character, Uitham, to the list, and the toughness bond for Patsir and Farakia. Liana is a top-tier healer with a bunch of great skills, including the game-changing Act Again. As one of the 2 best healers in the game back in the day, she used to be the backbone of many teams. Now there are a lot of excellent healers, so there's more competition and variety. We also know about her 3-cost skill now. It passively enhances her talent, so whenever her talent removes a debuff, it also adds a random buff. When it's used as a skill, it essentially gospels your target, heals allies, and removes 2 debuffs in an area around Liana, and gives Liana herself 1 turn of debuff immunity, so you're kind of getting 2 gospels for the price of 1. She's a member of Princess Alliance, buffed by Shelfaniel, Luna, and Christiane. Protagonists, buffed by Matthew. We can also add the newly revealed 2nd protagonist faction buffer to this list, Lavina the Great, and Legion of Glory, buffed by Ledin, Elwyn, and Grenier. As a top-tier healer, you'll want her in your team for pretty much any content you can use her for. She's excellent against Leviar, Phoenix, Scylla, Needhog, Hugin and Munin, and a perennial favorite in Apex Arena, still. She's one of the stronger healer options against debuff boxes, especially since your Rosenseal's gonna get banned. She unlocks the attack bonds for Elwyn, Young Jessica, and Scott. Luna is a very versatile mobile DPS and team support unit with a talent that reduces your team's magic damage taken, and a 3-cost skill that can boost allies' mobility. She also has a unique helmet coming to global relatively soon, and this increases the span of her auras, and also gives a kind of watered-down King's Crown buff to multiple allies instead of just 1. It's just not as powerful, that's the only thing. She has one of the 3 faction buffs for Princess Alliance, causing you to inflict an additional fixed damage burst equal to 15% of the enemy's remaining hit points. Shelfaniel and Christiane have the other buffs. She's also a member of Origins of Light, buffed by Dehart, Jugler, and Freya, and Strategic Masters, buffed by Altemuller and Lanford. This puts her on faction for Leviar, Phoenix, and Valkyrie in the Eternal Temple, and makes her an excellent pick against Jormungandr, Sleipnir, and particularly Needhog in Ancient Beckoning. She's not as reliable as a PvP DPS as she used to be, but she can still be a good rush support, and her anti-magic tech might be useful in the face of upcoming threats like Kyura, especially if Christiane helps her out by bringing the faction buff. She unlocks the attack bond for Lewin, and she unlocks the toughness bond for Claret. I didn't mention her unique helm in this video, so it's worth inserting a few words about that. It's kind of like a watered-down King's Crown, but in a good way. Instead of granting plus 20% damage to 1 adjacent ally, it grants plus 15% damage to 2 adjacent allies. It also increases the span of her talent and 3C auras. Bozel is an AoE debuffer. He carries a faction buff for Dark Reincarnation, and he unlocks the attack bonds for Ares, Bernhardt, Licorice, and Egbert, and the defensive bonds for Patsir and Farakia. Liana is a top-tier healer with Act Again, and she unlocks the attack bonds for Elwyn, Young Jessica, and Scott. Finally, Luna is a versatile mobile DPS and support. She has one of the faction buffs for Princess Alliance, and she unlocks the attack bond for Lewin and the defensive bond for Claret. Alright, it's time for a double shot of notes for noobs. And non-noobs who like helpful summaries, please don't be offended. Shilinka is alright. She's a niche unit for people who like to play with unique assassins. You can skip her unless you really need her for Kruger's bonds. Same goes for Tsubame. She gets the edge in bond unlocking though, since she's needed for Florentia and Christiane's defensive bonds, both important ones. Angelina is a good flexible pick. She's not an absolutely essential OP unit for anything, but you can build her and put her to good use. So yeah, you don't need her, but if you like her and you want to invest in her, then who am I to stop you? Bozel is mad OP. He has a faction buff, he's very self-reliant, his 3C is super powerful, and he's widely useful across PvE and PvP, so summon for him. Liana is one of the best healers in the game. She has Act Again, and her upcoming 3C puts her back on the map in PvP, so summon for her. Luna isn't as essential as she used to be, but she's still one of the game's better flexible support units. If you're summoning for the others and you get her, then don't be mad. If she's the last unit remaining on the banner, then go ahead and put that Destiny guarantee to good use. Finally, just the usual reminder about upcoming banners. Next week sees the launch of the next new characters from Langrisser Reincarnation Tensei, Suzette and Christiane. Suzette is a little AoE archer, and Christiane is a faction buffing tank who's going to create ripples in the meta for a while. In the weeks following that, we'll see a Wheeler and Toa raid-up banner, as well as Destiny banners featuring Clotaire, Lanford and Rainforce, Cherie, Licorice and Amelia, and Rachel, Lana, and Tiaris. Alright, so that's it for this episode. I hope you found this revision-type format and these summaries helpful enough to warrant a little thumbs up. Let me know in the comments if you plan on summoning on either of these banners, or whether you're going to hold tight till next week. I do have a guaranteed Shilinka waiting to unlock Kruger's full girth, so I'll be summoning for her for sure. As always with Destiny guarantees, all we can do is hope she decides to come home cheap. As always, thank you so much for watching, best of luck in your own summoning sessions, and I'll catch you in the next Should You Summon. Extra special thanks of course to our Langrisser tier channel members for generously supporting the channel directly. Levitt, Derek Gunderson, Kyle Greer-Brown, William Householder, Kate Soon, Jared Portela, Eden Seal, and Shara Ilimerius. Thanks folks.